Last month, I walked into a conference room for what I thought was a routine team meeting. Instead, I found myself sitting across from HR and my 29-year-old manager, who looked at me and said, "We think it's time for you to consider a different role. This video is for you." It's about experienced professionals being pushed out, overlooked, and undervalued simply because of a number. And it's happening more than you think. Something more. Age appropriate. I'm 56 years old, and in that moment, I realized my 2 decades of experience meant nothing. I wasn't being evaluated on my performance. I was being judged on my birth certificate. Comments about my old school approach to things that weren't old school at all. Being excluded from brainstorming sessions because apparently my ideas weren't fresh enough. Watching younger colleagues get promoted to positions I was more qualified for, while being told I needed to stay in my lane. But when it came time to assign the project lead, guess who got it? Jake. I was being evaluated on my age. And in their minds, 56 was too old to be innovative, too old to be dynamic, too old to be relevant. Because he was more relatable to the client's younger demographic. I've launched successful campaigns, managed million-dollar budgets, and mentored dozens of junior employees. I'd analyze every interaction, every email, every meeting, looking for signs that I was being pushed out. I was exhausted from trying to prove I still belonged in a workplace that clearly didn't value what I brought to the table. I've adapted to every new technology, learned every new platform, and consistently exceeded my targets. On paper, I'm exactly the kind of employee any company should want to keep. When someone made a comment about my old school methods, I'd respond with specific examples of how those methods had delivered results. She taught me that confidence isn't about proving you're young enough to be relevant. It's about proving you're experienced enough to be indispensable. Not trying to look younger, but trying to feel stronger. I focused on my physical health, my mental health, and my professional development. I took courses, attended conferences, and made sure I stayed current not because I was afraid of being seen as outdated, but because I wanted to continue growing. Ageism in the workplace isn't something you solve with one conversation or one success story. It's a systemic issue that requires ongoing advocacy, both for yourself and for others facing similar challenges. I want you to know that you're not imagining it. It's real, it's wrong, and it's happening to more people than we talk about. But you're not powerless against it. When I was excluded from meetings, I'd ask directly why my input wasn't needed. Advocate for yourself. Your willingness to speak up, to document, to advocate, and to refuse to accept that your value has an expiration date. I'm not ready to make room for younger workers by disappearing. I'm ready to continue contributing, learning, and growing in a workplace that values what I bring to the table. Connect with others who understand what you're going through. Here's what you need to understand when you push out experienced workers, and any workplace that doesn't recognize that is missing out on some of their most valuable contributors. Don't let them push you out before you're ready to go. And that phase can be just as dynamic, just as innovative, and just as valuable as any other. You're not just losing individual employees. You're losing institutional knowledge. The question is whether your workplace is mature enough to recognize what you bring to the table. Mentorship capacity, and the kind of wisdom that only comes from years of experience. You're creating a workplace culture that tells every employee they have an expiration date. And remember that your experience isn't a liability, it's an asset that any smart employer should value. I found online communities, professional networks, and support groups where age discrimination wasn't just acknowledged, it was actively combated. Pay attention. Age discrimination isn't just about protecting older workers. Workers over 50 are unemployed for longer periods than younger workers. They're more likely to face age-related questions in interviews. They're more likely to be passed over for promotions. And they're more likely to retire earlier than planned, not because they want to, but because they can't find employers willing to value their experience. It's about creating workplaces where experience is valued. Every time someone challenges these assumptions, every time someone refuses to be invisible, we're changing the conversation. We're making it harder for employers to discriminate and easier for experienced workers to thrive. Where diversity includes age diversity, AARP has resources and advocacy programs. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission takes age discrimination seriously. There are legal protections, though they're not always enforced as strongly as they should be. And where everyone can contribute their best work regardless of how many candles were on their last birthday cake. I realized I wasn't alone in this fight. I stopped apologizing for my experience and started leveraging it. I refuse to accept that 56 is too old to be innovative, too old to be valuable, too old to be heard. I have 2 decades of experience, and I'm not going to apologize for that anymore. Instead of quietly accepting their suggestion to move to a more age-appropriate role, I came prepared with documentation of my performance, my contributions, and my value to the team. I challenged their assumptions and made it clear that my age was not a limitation, it was an asset. I started dyeing my hair more frequently, updating my wardrobe, trying to blend in with colleagues who were closer to my daughter's age than mine. I felt like I was performing youth instead of demonstrating competence. I couldn't afford to take a massive pay cut. I couldn't afford to be unemployed for months while trying to find someone willing to hire an older worker. I created a record of my contributions that had nothing to do with my age and everything to do with my value. The thought of explaining a gap in my resume, of facing the same age-related questions in interviews, kept me up at night. If you've ever felt invisible in your own workplace, if you've ever watched younger colleagues get opportunities you're more qualified for, if you've ever been told you're overqualified for a position you desperately wanted, I could continue shrinking myself to fit their narrow definition of valuable, or I could start advocating for myself and what I brought to the table. Because ageism in the workplace isn't just about older workers struggling to find jobs. Let me tell you what ageism really looks like, because until it happened to me, I thought it was just something that happened to other people. I'm 56 years old. I've been working in marketing for 22 years. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen as an asset and started being seen as a liability. It didn't happen overnight. It was subtle at first. But the moment that changed everything happened 3 months ago. We were pitching a major client, and I'd spent weeks preparing a comprehensive strategy. The night before the presentation, my manager pulled me aside and said, "I think it's better if Jake presents this. He has more energy." Jake had been with the company for 8 months. I'd been there for 6 years. But apparently, his energy was more valuable than my expertise. I presented anyway. Our client loved the strategy and specifically praised my insight and experience. That's when I realized what was happening. I wasn't being evaluated on my skills, my results, or my contributions. The worst part, I started believing it myself. I found myself second-guessing every idea, wondering if it sounded too old-fashioned. The stress was overwhelming. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. wondering if today would be the day they'd find an excuse to let me go. And the financial anxiety was crushing. At 56, I couldn't afford to start over. But then something shifted. I realized I had a choice. I started documenting everything. Every successful project, every positive client feedback, every mentorship moment with younger colleagues. I also started speaking up. I found a mentor in my former boss, who was 62 and had successfully navigated similar challenges. I also started taking care of myself differently. Most importantly, I started connecting with other professionals who were facing similar challenges. The conversation with HR that I mentioned at the beginning? It didn't go the way they expected. I'm still fighting this battle. But I refuse to be invisible. If you're watching this and you've experienced ageism in your workplace, document your contributions. To the younger viewers watching this, and to the employers watching this, the statistics are staggering. But here's what gives me hope. Every time someone speaks up about ageism, there are organizations fighting for age equality in the workplace. But the most important resource is your own voice. I'm 56 years old. I'm not ready to retire. I'm not ready to step aside. And if my current employer can't see that value, then maybe it's time to find one that can. Because age isn't just a number. It's experience. It's wisdom. It's perspective. Don't let them make you invisible. Don't let them convince you that your experience doesn't matter. Your career isn't over at 50 or 55 or 60. It's just entering a new phase. The question isn't whether you're too old to be relevant. And if they're not, that's their loss, not yours.